I'm Mary Lyons, the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander with Acorn Grove.
Welcome to the Wealth and Income Podcast. Today, we are going to do a case study. Recent feedback from our listener says that their favorite episodes are the ones where they get to see themselves. The episodes where we go down the rabbit trail, we talk about a couple or an individual and what they're experiencing, and then we walk through the thought process of the plan build and the hesitations, and all the different iterations that we do from that sort of thing, so that you get the concrete from the plan building and the math, and then you get sort of the emotional and psychological insights that sometimes then you can take and apply to your own situation.
Right.
So we're going to go deep today into all of that. Yeah. Well, okay. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of the demographics here on this particular individual. So they live in a part of the country where the cost of living is not particularly high. So it's not a very metropolitan area, if you will. And the cost of living is pretty reasonable and affordable. This individual has, for most of their adult life, made between 150 and 250, depending on the year. They're a small business owner, a solopreneur, kind of doing their own thing in the consulting space. And there were some things that happened over the past couple of years with some of the economic incentives that were put out that definitely have benefited their economy, I think, because they jumped from about 200 a year of income up to 800 2 years ago, and then 1.2 million last year. And because of the way some of those economic incentives work, or at the programs are expiring, there's probably a very good likelihood that they are going to drop back into that 150 to 250 range that they're used to.
Right.
So I think it's important to start with that. The other thing that I think is important to talk about is the fact that these guys have done such a phenomenal job saving all of that extra money. So they definitely have taken advantage of some of the fun stuff and, you know, gone on trips and done some things that they've been wanting to do. But they probably saved over the past 2 years, I would say like 1.1 to 1.2 of capital. And when you factor in
that's
how
huge.
much was already going to taxes, they have saved almost everything above their normal lifestyle rate.
Which kudos, like I want to pause there because nobody does that.
Right.
Nobody does that.
Right. So when I first sat down with them, they were sitting on, and I'm trying to do the math in my head, about 1.1 million of cash.
Right.
Because all of this is recent and interest rates are high enough that most of their capital just went into a money market fund. And then in addition to that, I'll give you guys the scoop, the data that they had. They were sitting on a pretty healthy position in their assets anyways. And my internet is going so slow today.
Yeah.
But they had a nice chunk of change sitting in a SEP IRA. I want to say a little over 200,000. They had about 14,000 also sitting in a Roth IRA. So that was kind of their whole picture. And they're about 47 years old.
Right.
And they want to retire by 55. So that was kind of the mission. Although I will tell you, as we go through our process and we help people connect to their dreams, the idea that that was even a possibility, it was like a throwaway comment. Well, I might, I like working and I'm good at what I do. And so I want to work forever. And then I will tell you, through the course of our conversations, that dialogue changed pretty dramatically to, a minute, I could be done at 55.
Right. Well, and I think it's such a hard conversation to have in the abstract, because we have that conversation quite a bit of what would I do if I won the lottery, or what would I blah, blah, blah. What if? I think it's a very different conversation when you say, what would you do if you won the lottery? Like you kind of go into sort of like Neverland. You're like, well, I would do X, Y, and Z, and I would save the baby seals, and I would travel all the time, or whatever it is that you think you're supposed to say. But in watching you go through this client's work and knowing a little bit more about them, that concrete thing of like, no, this isn't a like, what if you won the lottery kind of thing. You just won the lottery and here's what it looks like. would you actually do it? No, 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 I'll work forever because that's what we're supposed to say. To no, it's actually possible. And it's like, well, then I want that. Like,
Right.
and being able to actually lean in.
Well, and this is the thing, and I've heard this feedback a lot recently that, and this is why we do the dreams workshop too.
Right.
So the whole thing through helping people connect to their dreams is because as we become adults, we lose touch with what our dreams actually are, and we start settling for what we think we should do instead of going after what it is we really want.
Right.
What was really cool about this particular workshop is this couple was like, we haven't thought about these things. So even though their income just like blew up right into this huge number for the past 2
10x.
years, yeah, the conversations weren't what can we do differently. It was let's save all this and keep doing everything exactly the same way, which is incredibly prudent. And I don't want to minimize that. But at some point, it's like, well, what if you had permission to do a little bit more, right? Because if you think about living on 200 a year and now you're at 800, if 40% of that is going to taxes, then you've got a couple $100,000 that you can put away, and at 1.2 million you've got probably
they've probably got 300 or 400 now that they could go put away, which is a very different system, right? If you go from 200 to 800 and 800 to 1.2, even with a lot of taxes coming out, that's a big deal.
It is. And thank you for popping in. My internet is just, I don't know what's happening today. We'll have to see if we even end up with a coherent podcast at the end of this. So frustrating. Well, and so here's the thing. As I went through the dreams workshop and we started connecting to the dreams, he kind of, the husband was like, I really want this house in the mountains. We vacation in a particular part of the country, and we've stayed at this same house a couple of times. And I always just kind of jokingly said, if this house ever came up, I would buy it. And he's like, I had forgotten all about that. And so like 2 days after we had this conversation, the house came on the market. Isn't that bizarre? I mean, I was just kind of blown away. Yeah. And so in the time between the dreams workshop and our first like really concrete meeting, he put an offer on this house and the offer was accepted. And so it was really cool for me to walk into that second meeting, and he was like, hey, I'm realizing a dream. And it was something that big. I mean, it's weird how sometimes once you put your dreams out there, the universe conspires to make them come true. But you have to know what they are in order for them to come true, because otherwise that house might have come on the market and sold and he never would have known.
Right. Yeah.
And he was sitting on enough cash that he made a cash offer, which I think is part of the reason he got the deal he got on the property. But that changes the picture for what I get to work with too, because there's a substantial amount of capital that just went poof, gone, that got him something he wanted. But at the same time, now I'm going to have to work very differently to make sure that the other things he wants comes true as well. And so this is where the original plan that I built for him showed us saving a bunch of money and him retiring at age 65. And then the practical conversations come in.
Yeah, well, the data tells just some of the story, I think, is part of that. Like when you get a fact finder back and you get what I call the where do all the dead bodies live page, right? Or pages. I get this account, I'm saving this much, and it sort of starts to collect the information, but it's just data. It doesn't tell a story, it doesn't tell direction.
I actually think it's even beyond that, Eric, because what I find with the fact finder that we get is that people are maybe embarrassed or have some shame somewhere, or they just want someone to tell them, hey, you're doing a great job. And so a lot of times they maybe exaggerate the numbers a little bit. So in the initial conversations, what I know is this gentleman made 800 2 years ago and 1.2 million last year. And that he can save a lot of money and wants to continue doing that. And then when the rubber meets the road and I build a design and a projection into the future, all of a sudden a different set of variables comes out, right? And I think a lot of times people don't even realize that they're doing it because they're like, look, I'm doing a great job. And then when you're like, okay, now you need to commit to something, they're like, whoa, I don't think I can actually commit to that.
Slow down. Yep.
And the numbers change. right? They change in some cases dramatically, because what came out then was, there's Grant that makes all of this income possible and has created all of this work. If it goes away, the income goes back to what it used to be.
Right.
Potentially, right? And so then all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, these are the numbers I'm actually willing to work with. And I would argue that even then, because the possibilities have been so different for the past 2 years, that the numbers that I am given are still feel very aggressive in a world where that income goes away. Because if you're used to having 200 grand a year, and then for 2 years, you're at close to $1 million, going
Right.
back to 200, even if you did not make an adjustment to lifestyle, actually feels really scary.
Well, yeah. Well, because if you're 47 years old, and that's how how old they are now, they've been living at that level for a long time. It's not
Mhm.
like they were starting out in their 20s and they had a really great year and then they're back to normal and it's whatever. They've been at that run rate, which means they're probably operating on a fair amount of like, okay, what are we spending? Should we go out to eat tonight? Should we not? Man, should we? Like they're not counting, they're not pinching pennies. They're probably
Right.
not at the level of like clipping coupons in order to make ends meet, but they're probably also having to pay attention so that it doesn't get away from them. And so
Right.
if you've had 2 years where the brakes are off and you can kind of be dumb and stupid and frivolous and exorbitant and you can do all the things and there's only yeses in front of you, to have to go back to that world that you're used to. It's not a crazy world and you didn't expand, but mentally you did.
Right.
And to have to mentally pull back on that, it's got to be daunting.
Well, because what you're talking about is having actively sat in this place of real abundance,
Right.
and then you're pulling back to a place where it feels like scarcity after being in that environment. And it's impossible for your mindset not to be affected by those things. So here's the thing. So what we really got to when we started talking about this, one of the things I asked was, what are you really living off of? And the answer was between 150 and 200 grand a year. Like
Right.
even when they're making 250 a year of income, they're saving about $100,000 of that money.
Right.
And that was a clip that they've been on here for a short while. And so that's how I built the model. And
Right.
it's an interesting thing. So when you look at having, call it 280, 290,000 in a SEP and the 14 in the Roth, and then after the purchase of the property, still about 400 grand that's sitting in a money market account, and then being able to put 50 grand a year into your SEP IRA and 50 grand maybe into the money market account, you're in a pretty good position. This
Right.
couple also has 2 small rental properties, that by age 55, they should have about $500,000 worth of equity in those 2 rental properties. And they're
Right.
producing, call it 24,000 a year in profit. So about 2 grand a month of positive cash flow.
Right.
So I built one plan that shows them reinvesting the money from the rental properties plus the 100,000 that they can actually save. And it was still very scary.
Yeah, well, you're just obligated them to keeping up with that momentum, to keeping up with that 100K that they can go do. It's been something they've been working on, but that 100K going in, being able to keep going in that range, knowing that their income could go from 1.2, 1.8, or 1.2 to 800K back down to 150. And then you're saying, yeah, but you got to keep putting in another 100. You got to keep putting in another 100 and a quarter. Like you got to go save all of this, knowing that all of that could change, not quite overnight, but almost as overnight as it's going to feel. That it's
And
got to be scary.
it doesn't matter that you did it before, because it
Right.
feels different now. It feels different. And so I built the strategy, and just for giggles, I built it to see what would happen if they saved that $124,000 a year and
Right.
retired in 7 or 8 years. So from
Right.
47 to age 55. And if they did things the traditional way, where it just all goes into the market, we assumed about a 6% rate of return. They end up with about 88,000 a year of income.
Right.
And if we built the model the way we teach, which is creating the option to have a simulated pension or a shock absorber for the market,
Right.
then you create totally different income choices. And you do that, just for those of you that are joining us for the first time, by funding a combination of investments, which is why we had about 50 grand going into the SEP IRA. We're going to continue that.
Right.
But the other 50 that's currently going into the money market account, we looked at redirecting into a whole life insurance policy.
Right.
And one that's designed for flexible contributions, which is not what happens when you buy a policy off the shelf.
Right.
So that if things are radically different and they cannot save money, you can reduce the premium to about $15,000 a year, the way I designed it. And,
Right.
and maybe the number's 20. Let's just say that that number was 20 so that it's a bigger number in that pool. But
Right.
what I tried to do is I tried to design this so that if everything goes wrong and they can't save any money,
Right.
that the income being produced by the rental property will pay the premiums. And I did that on purpose because I think when you are facing this major change that's negative in terms of income and abundance, you
Right.
need to know that the plan can sustain itself with no actual contributions from you. I think there's just a peace of mind that needs to happen there. And so the way we designed this, if you fully funded the strategy, there was about 142 of income at age 55 instead of the 88,000 on the same amount of money being saved, but less focus on income. When I designed it so that the only thing going in was the money from the rental properties to fund the insurance, because I'm trying to get the investments and insurance in balance, and we already have lots of investments. They actually got to 82,000 of income without saving the 100 a year. And remember, if they were doing things the conventional way, they were going to be at 88,000 of income per year at the same age, but that's saving an extra 100 grand for the next 8 years.
Right. So they get to the same spot saving 20 grand as that they were doing 120.
Saving 24. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
24.
yes, because there's more efficiency in the income.
Right.
And the thing, like the reason that I wanted to go over this, and we have another one coming up that's similar, but with much bigger numbers, is because a lot of times it is the fear of an ongoing commitment that keeps us from moving forward.
Yep.
Like we'll buy a house and commit to a mortgage payment, no problem. But committing to saving money, I think there's a barrier or a roadblock there because it's not immediately fun and you're not living in the space.
Right. You don't get to go visit your investment account. Like that's not a thing. Right.
It feels like a sacrifice, not like you're gaining something. But I would argue that if you can get to the same place in 8 years or pretty darn close to it, and you don't have to save the 100,000, you have provided yourself a lot more flexibility.
Right.
Right. So, your upside here is that if I do save it, I'm at 142. If I don't save it, I'm at 82. Like you then in a short period of time where you are. And if you look at the same numbers, if you save the whole amount and you're only going to be at 88, to me, that reeks of inefficiency.
Right. Well, but I think it's also scary on that side of it. And I think it's scary because when I think about hierarchy of needs, because I keep going back to it because I think it drives so much of what we do, is they went from, I'm doing the thing, I'm knocking it out. They're at that kind of mid-range in the hierarchy of needs, right? They're not worried about paying their bills or being homeless, but they're not quite into that I'm free, I can do whatever I want moment. And then they had this brief foray into it of what that looks like on that side of it. And their brains expanded into that area. But when I think if you're fearful of getting pulled back down, that fear comes with all the rest of the baggage that you just let go. Like those bags are still waiting on the corner for you. You just got to pick them up and carry them around.
Right. And I think too, the other thing that happens is that as humans, when we approach times of uncertainty, we have a tendency to do nothing as opposed to proactively making choices that still put us into a better situation. We tend to take a wait and see attitude, and a wait and see attitude is not necessarily what we should be doing. My mom always says, not making a choice is to make a choice. You're
Right.
just choosing to do nothing, and you get the consequences that come with that. And so kind of bravely facing the change in situation and knowing in a worst case scenario, I'm still better off doing these things because either I have an existing asset that's going to fund what I'm doing. I'm just transferring money from one pocket to the other, or I'm using income that I'm not currently and have never used for lifestyle purposes with the rental income to
Right.
fund the situation, then you're going to be okay. And it's interesting to see sometimes the objections start in these situations, because
Yeah.
even though we spent hours together talking about shifting from rate of return to income creation, the way our brains work, we want to go right back, right? We're already getting thrown back into an old version of ourselves from an income perspective. We
Right.
want to go back to an old thought process too. And so one of the first objections was, but what if I can earn more than 6%? And so
Right.
I built that same model with all the contributions going in just to make sure all the money was earning. And if you could get a 10% rate of return every year from now until age 55 in this person's situation, then it took the normal income doing it the conventional way from 88,000 to 108. But doing things this way, doing it our way, where we're looking at creating better income strategies, that it jumps up to 170,000.
Yeah.
And so you're materially better off. Instead of an extra 20 grand of income per year, doing it with a more deliberate structure and income strategy, you're better off by 30 grand of income per year. And if you're used to living off of close to 200, 170 is going to feel a lot better than 108.
Right. Well, and I think that's why it's so interesting seeing that process, because everyone does this, right? Because I think we are taught that there's an either or question built into everything that we're doing. And
Right.
if I do insurance, then I'm foregoing the market. So because it's either or, I have to make that trade-off. And it's such a fun time and such a challenging conversation to go, no, 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 no. Remember, we still have market. The answer to every solution isn't more insurance. The answer to the solution is a balanced model. And if you have more rate of return in the market, then get more rate of return. That's wonderful. Doing this other strategy doesn't preclude us from killing it in the market and getting 10, 20, 30, 40, whatever the market can give us. It's not an either or. And I think that's the single hardest piece, is training the and in the brain and
Right.
getting away from either or. And I think that's why the brilliance of how you built that original version of it was, if you can save 124,000, life is going to be great. If you can't save it, we can do everything you need to go do, but at a smaller level, and everything will still be fine. And I think it's that the efficiency is a much bigger turn than the rate of return.
Right. Your strategies for your financial future should be able to expand and contract based on what you have going on during your lifetime.
Right.
And you should be setting yourself up so that you have choices for how you take income on whatever date you decide you want to retire. And if he looks at that number and says, I don't want to retire with 140 to 170,000 of income when he's 55, guess what? He can keep working. And if he plans accordingly, he
Right.
can, right? I mean, that's the beauty of it, is that if you are deliberate, you can set yourself up to make choices. But if you don't plan at all, or you take kind of a willy-nilly junk drawer kind of approach to building your finances, then you kind of get what you get, and it doesn't change anything.
Well, the problem is by the time you figure out what you're going to get, it's too late to do anything about it,
Right.
because it's
So
time.
I think if we can leave you with one thing, it's if you find yourself in a space where you have hesitation because you aren't sure of what is going to change or what could change in your life, or maybe you fear that you might lose a job, or there could be some pay cut, or all of the negative things that we all as adults worry about. I'm going to go back to this idea that you can model it.
Well, and have
See what
somebody
your
that's
worst case is.
well, and have somebody helping you model it that doesn't live in your house. I think there's some value in, or yeah, that's somebody that's not related to you helping you model it, because they're not looking at it objectively because they're in the pool with you trying to figure it out. I think
Right.
that's the value in having outside education and outside help that you can trust
Mhm.
is somebody that's like, look, I'm advocating for the 75-year-old you that can't be in the room right now, and I'm fighting for that person's future and helping you manage that decision.
And it shouldn't just be managing the money or the math. They should be helping you figure out where you're getting in your own way. It's
Yeah,
a
I mean, it's at least half of our job is psychology, at least half.
right.
The other half is marriage counseling, and I'm not sure where the math works, but
It's in there somewhere,
it's in
especially
this.
the smaller part, right?
Yeah.
Here's what I'll say. Hopefully this was helpful for you guys. I think that probably coming up in the near future, we will do another long form listening kind of podcast, because the
Yeah.
one that we did a deep dive into the infinite banking concept for 2 hours. We got a lot of positive feedback from you guys about that one. And so I think we may have one coming up here where we do like a 2 hour deep dive into how you can create more income efficiencies without having to give up rate of return, so
Yep.
that you can get further faster with the same amount of resources, and you can do it without taking additional risk. Because we made a lot of references in today's podcast that if you're a new listener, you might be like, dang, that sounds like magic, and I don't know how they got there. We'll come out with a big deep dive here soon where you can go into all the technical aspects and digest it all in one long sit down, if that floats your boat.
Awesome. Where can they find you, Mary?
You can find me at The Wealth Woman wherever you social media. Eric, what about you?
Yeah, and I'm at Economics with Eric wherever you social media. Have a great day.
Specific financial concepts and advanced strategies are presented to you for educational purposes only. We cannot and do not guarantee their applicability to your individual circumstance. We encourage you to seek personalized advice from qualified professionals on all financial matters.
Provided content is for overview and is not intended and should not be relied upon as individualized tax, legal, fiduciary, or investment advice. Neither Wealth Woman, Acorn Grove, or the Wealth and Income Podcast, nor their representatives provide tax or legal advice. For answers to specific questions and before making any decision, please consult a qualified attorney or tax advisors.
All numeric examples and any individual shown are hypothetical and were used for explanatory purposes only. Actual results may vary.
Investing involves risk, which includes potential loss of principal. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company.
Life insurance should be purchased by individuals that have a need to provide a death benefit to protect others with insurable interests in their lives against financial loss. Life insurance is not a retirement plan, investment, or savings account.
Not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or any governmental agency. Insurance and investment products, not a deposit, not FDIC or NCUA insured, not insured by any federal government agency, not guaranteed by any bank or credit union, may lose value.
Please visit the Wealth Woman website disclosure page for other important disclosures.